Contrary to the video's title, this is not a Moze hype video. Instead, this is a look back at what was once a very niche meta and now transitions into one of the fastest trending playstyle in Honkai style, DPS Support, and also why you should be hyped for Moze. In your mind, you're thinking, why dual DPS when you can just hypercarry everything? To that, I say, if you want to do that, that's totally fine. But if you're ignoring it, it will only continue to get better. Every single endgame content has evolved beyond our normal approach, and we have a lot, and I mean a lot more characters than ever before. Compare that to 1.0 all the way to now. Having the option to switch from a hypercarry to a double DPS is only going to be easier. Newer endgame modes, Pure Fiction and Apocalyptic Shadow, favors teams that have 2 DPSs. The question is, do you have enough buffing to make sure that both of those DPS can deal damage, or do you have enough DPS to make sure that they don't fall off without having a very reliable team-wide support? Apocalyptic Shadow demands even more speed clears because again, we're battling against the action value. Therefore, we need more buffing sources, while also the devs are continually raising the DPS floor. Furthermore, the unit variety is a welcome change, and it is growing to the point where many overlapping roles is the right way to go and continue the natural evolution of the character rosters. The biggest key defining factor, however, combining the ability to deal respectable damage and the ability to buff either themselves or another ally. Lots of things helped put this one's niche section of the DPS meta into a respectable spot. The first instance of a quote-unquote DPS support, basically a support that can act as a DPS, albeit very much niche and wonky, is, believe it or not, Yukong. Yukong is a single target nuke that has the ability to buff across the entire team with an attack buff, and also if you use her ultimate while the attack buff is active, you can buff crit rate and crit damage to the entire team from her ultimate. But again, she is a 4-star imaginary, and her role as a team-wide buffer comes first before her single target capabilities. We first have an intro of a DPS support when Topaz comes out, a 5-star hunt sub-DPS that's primary role is not to be a pure hypercarry, albeit you still can build her as that, but to be a buffer for a follow-up attack meta, thanks to Nambi giving a 25% follow-up attack damage increase. Nambi can advance itself forward for every 2 follow-up attacks. When you apply Nambi to the enemy, we'll get even more attack frequency the more units with follow-up mechanic is added. We currently have a lot of follow-up units in the game, and all of them can work very much greatly with Topaz. For Pure Fiction, and again follow-up attacks, Jade is then introduced, a 5-star erudition unit that can buff allies as a part of her skill. It is not some inherent talent, it is a part of her skill. You need to use her skill in order to buff an ally. A speed increase and additional damage to the buffed allies at the cost of HP. It works synergistically with Jade since she needs to use her AoE follow-up attacks once you reach 8 stacks. It relies on the buffed ally to do most of the work and the number of enemies you face. The core synergy of Jade giving a buff, a speed buff and additional damage to an ally, and in return she gets faster follow-up attack generation, benefits both characters involved. This is another notable example of Jade as a dual role DPS support. Now coincidentally, none of the units so far can actually use the HP consumption other than our favorite emo man, Blade. Blade can use Jade's HP consumption, and in return he gets an additional damage, a speed buff, and a faster follow-up attack generation for his talent. The latest example of this DPS support archetype comes from our free 4-star March 7, a speed buff from her skill and an additional damage increase or toughness reduction increase depending on which path the buff unit's from. And also she can enhance her basic attack after using an ultimate, and she has a stacking mechanic that incentivizes quicker ally turns. The faster your buffed ally go, the faster her talent stacking generation, and in return, the faster she gets her enhanced basic. It helps also that her Eidolon 2 gives her even more attack frequency by adding a follow-up attack after your buffed ally attacks. Truly an epitome of DPS support. Seeing the list, two things stand out. You either helped giving buffs to an ally, Jade and March 7th, or you helped your team by applying a damage increase to the enemy, or what you would like to call a debuff, which is what Topaz does. You either buffed an ally or you apply a debuff to an enemy. 2.5 units and even more units in the future could follow the same path of overlapping roles instead of being a very much hyper-focused roles. With hopefully some interesting gameplay changes, we might see maybe an actual DPS support, we might see a DPS preservation. The most likely candidate of a dual DPS role, however, in my opinion, for the upcoming 2.5 units is Moze. In lore, he can disappear and reappear at will, he is a stealth master, and also has an Assassin's Creed getup. And also he's a 4-star. We definitely need another 4-star experimentation since our last 4-star that is quite broken, in my opinion, is Gallagher. The 2.5 special program confirms that Moze is a DPS that has a hybrid role in that he can buff follow-up attacks, also focuses on dealing respectable single target damage. Whenever he consumes 3 stacks, he will do a follow-up attack. You see that in the special program. I'm not sure how his skill point management would be since he disappears on the field. I would assume that his Eidolons or maybe one of his talents or maybe one of his core passive could actually help with skill point management. His natural playstyle is going to be skill point negative regardless, with or without Eidolons. The biggest draw for him, however, is the possibility, in my opinion, for revenge characters, in this example is Clara and Yun Li or possibly even Blade, to gain even more out of their counters since you have one less person battling the RNGesus to get hit by an enemy. Unless you have Tingyan, who is the primary preservation god, you should be good. Furthermore, we have the possibility of a 5-star Moze-like in the future that could be even better than the 4-star counterpart, but we'll just have to see. For now, Moze looks to be a 4-star version of Topaz, but instead of deploying Nambi, he deletes himself from the field. Well, not really deletes himself, he disappears from the field, and for 3 stacks, he will do a follow-up attack. The possibility of him working with Feixiao is through the roof because again, Feixiao is designed around follow-up attacks, and Moze, another DPS support role, but we'll just have to see how he looks in the early playtests. Bottom line is, I'm excited for Moze, I'm excited for how the DPS support's gonna turn out in the future, and I hope that you do as well. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you learned something new. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and see you around.